So why is it that so many amazingly talented people think they're terrible, while folks who just started and don't know really what they're doing, they think they're awesome? Why is it that so many really intelligent people think they don't have anything to offer or to contribute, while people with barely 2 brain cells to rub together think they have all the answers? Let's talk about it. So several years ago, when I was a senior in college, the football season had ended, but there were several of us still hanging around the athletic complex getting ready for various things. I had quite a few teammates who were getting ready to go to the NFL Combine and who were trying to get into the National Football League, and then there were a bunch of us like me who were going to go to different tryouts to try to play in Canada or in the Arena League or something like that. And I remember one day we were in the indoor facility just running routes, and quarterbacks were throwing and receivers were just catching passes. And at one point, maybe 15-20 minutes into the workout, this guy walked in that I'd never seen before, and he was a massive human being. And I remember looking at one of our quarterbacks and I was like, hey, why did somebody invite the defensive tackle here when we're just throwing and catching? And he looked at me and he laughed and he said, oh no, that's a quarterback. And I was like, get out of here. That guy is enormous. There is no way he's a quarterback. But sure enough, he came in and started throwing in the drills with us, and I was running routes and catching passes from him, and he was okay. It was fine, but a lot of the passes were just pretty inaccurate. They were way too high or in the dirt, or he would throw it way too hard for how close I was. Like, it was just not a good day for this guy throwing the football. And I remember leaving the complex that afternoon, and on my way home I was just thinking, I don't think that guy is going to be very good. He's so big, there's no way that he can move. He's not mobile, he can't run, there's no possible way he can run very fast. And he wasn't very accurate, so I don't know if he's going to have really all that much of a chance to start. He was a transfer, he just gotten there. I was like, I don't know if he's going to be any good. But then fast forward a few months and it's opening day. I'm in the stadium at the very first game, that night game, and it was just a really cool atmosphere there. And that guy was the starter. He had won the starting quarterback job. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I guess he figured some things out, but I still don't know how good he's really going to be. But then that night he threw for 200 yards, ran for 200 yards, and scored 5 touchdowns. And it was like, oh, maybe this guy is pretty good. And that season, he would lead the team to win the national championship on the way to winning the Heisman Trophy, meaning he was the best football player in the nation. And then,
with the first pick in the 2011 NFL Draft, the Carolina Panthers select Cam Newton, quarterback, Auburn.
So yeah, he turned out all right, you might say. And looking back, it's kind of cool to be able to say that I caught passes from Cam Newton, but at the same time, it's very humbling because I didn't think he was going to be any good. And so it was a moment of realization that, hey, maybe I don't actually know what I'm talking about, especially when it comes to judging quarterbacks, especially judging a quarterback based on like 25 throws that I've ever seen him make. And that was a wonderful example of the DK effect. No, not that DK. That DK. The Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a type of cognitive bias that causes people to overestimate their knowledge or ability, particularly on a topic with which they have little to no actual experience. Basically, the less you know, the more you think you know, but then the opposite is also true, and the more you become an expert, the more you realize you have more questions than answers, and so the more doubt you have about things. It's the reason why Einstein once said, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And the reason why your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving thinks that if everyone would just listen to him, all the world's problems would be solved. The idea for this was sparked many years ago when David Dunning and Justin Kruger saw a news story about a bank robbery in which the robber didn't wear a disguise, he didn't wear a mask, and he even looked like directly into the security cameras.
Everybody be cool, this is a robbery!
And then, the police figured out who it was and then arrested him 15 minutes later, and the guy just could not believe he had been caught, and he kept saying, but I wore the juice. And come to find out, he had covered his face in lemon juice and was thinking that that was going to prevent the security cameras from being able to see him, because the main ingredient in invisible ink is lemon juice. And so he thought, well, if that's the main ingredient, then obviously this is going to work.
Not a great plan.
So here was a guy just wildly overconfident in his ability to rob a bank when he shouldn't have had any reason to believe that he was going to be good at this thing. And so anyway, these two psychologists, they started thinking through, well, what other applications could be in play here? Like, what other things in life do people think they're really good at something, but they're not? And is the opposite true? Anyway, so they started doing different studies and different things to figure it out. And what they learned was that typically the less proficient someone is at something, the better they think they are at it. And then the more proficient someone is, the more they think, I'm okay, I'm average, I'm not that great. And that actually explains a lot in life. For instance, why your 97-year-old grandfather still thinks he's an amazing driver, or why that friend that has really terrible eating habits and an awful diet, why they think they're amazingly healthy. It's why people who have just started getting into some kind of creative activity, art, movie making, game design, something like that, it's why they think they have the best ideas, they're going to change the world with their artistry. It's why new philosophers think they have all of life's answers. But then you talk to an old philosopher, a person who's been around a while, gained some wisdom, and actually gone through life and had some experiences. That's why they have a lot more questions than answers, because they have realized that there's a lot more that they don't know than they know.
So, Top thinks you give pretty good advice. And great tea.
The key to both is proper aging.
I can't tell you how many emails I've received as a board game publisher from brand new designers, and they'll say things like, hey, I've got this amazing idea, it's gonna make a ton of money, it's gonna sell more copies than Monopoly, which is a great sign to me, telling me that you have no idea what you're doing. But when I talk to amazing designers, people who have just created some of the best games in the world, they're super humble about things, and they're like, I don't know, is this good? It's like, yeah, it sold 2 million copies. It's pretty good. It's just so interesting, and it's why so often when we first get started with something, we think we're going to be an outlier. We think, oh, we're one of the best of all time. We're amazing. We're the greatest in the world at this thing, because we don't know what we don't know.
I am the smartest man alive!
And then, a couple years go by and you look back on your former self and you cringe and you're like, ugh, I can't believe I used to believe that. I can't believe I was so full of just this abundance of confidence. I had no idea what I was doing. And if there's anything I've learned about outliers over the years, just from personal experience, is that typically people who are actually outliers, they don't think they're outliers. Very rarely do you have a Michael Jordan type of person who is the greatest in the world, and they know it and they believe it and they kind of exude that confidence. That does happen, but for the most part, the people who are the absolute best, they don't think that. And even if you tell them, they're like, no, they don't even believe you. And it reminds me of the Walter Payton quote when he said, when you're good, you tell everybody. When you're great, they tell you. I mean, the greatest artist I have ever known thinks she's bad to the point where she won't even ever charge money for her art because she says it's not good enough. The greatest artist I know does things for free because she says her work isn't worth being paid for. And that's kind of tragic. It's kind of sad in a lot of ways, but that's just kind of the nature of outliers, of true outliers. I'm also reminded of a guy named Isaac Childress who designed a game called Gloomhaven. And years ago, when he first put it up on Kickstarter for the very first time, he's like, hey, does anybody want to play this game? Anybody want to back this project? And he was overwhelmed that, quite a few people wanted to buy it, but he still didn't think it was, going to be revolutionary. But then over the years, it became the highest rated board game in the world. And then he did a follow-up campaign that made millions upon millions upon millions of dollars because so many people love this thing. And I'm just remembering the interview I did with him years ago, and he's like, yeah, I had no idea. So when it comes to being an outlier, a good rule of thumb is to realize that if you think you're an outlier, you're not. And the only way to really be an outlier is to first and foremost think that you're not one. And I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it just seems to be the way of the world. So then the question is, how do you overcome the Dunning-Kruger effect? I mean, is it possible to get over your cognitive biases? And the short answer to that is no. We all have blind spots, and they're called blind spots because you can't see them. If you could see a blind spot, it wouldn't be a blind spot, so you wouldn't call it a blind spot, but you're always going to have blind spots, and so there's that. But I do have a few things to think about, a few ways to not necessarily overcome the Dunning-Kruger effect, but to at least minimize it as much as you can in your life. And the first one is to surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth. I talked about this in a previous video when I talked about having gauges in your life and having people that will just look at you, look at your creative work, look at whatever you've got going on, and they'll just be honest with you. They'll raise their hand and say, hey, have you thought about this? Or, hey, I'm seeing a blind spot over here. Just want you to be aware of it. And then you listen to them. I remember many years ago when I was in high school, there was a girl who was a couple years older than me. And unfortunately, one night she was driving home from band practice and she lost control of her car and she swerved off the road, hit a tree, and passed away. And it was really sad. I grew up in a small town in Alabama, and so everybody kind of knew everybody, and so it was tough. And the administration of the school, they got together and they wanted to do something. They wanted to do something to kind of remember this girl, to honor her, to have some kind of memorial type thing. And so they found a spot there on campus there at the school, and they got a little plaque made and this memorial deal. And to memorialize her, they planted a tree.
A tree? No way.
And I remember when they did the unveiling ceremony and they had this nice plaque and this tree that they had planted. And I remember thinking, did anybody double check about this? Like, this seems like an odd choice. I mean, if she had passed away in a fire, would you have like an eternal flame? If she had drowned, would you have built a little koi pond? Like, this just seems like the wrong way to handle this. And I can only think that there was nobody else in the room to go, hey, let's think about this. Maybe we're not seeing something. So if you want to know what's going on in your blind spots, you got to have people in your life that will point it out to you. Then the second way is to be willing to admit that you might be the idiot of the situation. Maybe you're the one that doesn't know what's going on. Maybe you're the one that doesn't understand.
It's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me.
And it can be so hard to admit that you're wrong, or even that you might be wrong, but it's so valuable and so important just to take a step back and to go, okay, I'm being super confident in this situation, but is that a negative? Is that a downside? Maybe I need to take a step back, ask some questions, figure some things out. Maybe I don't actually know as much as I think I do. And just being willing to admit that will actually put you light years ahead of everybody else, and it'll get you on your way to understanding things as they actually are. And then the third way is to be more humble. And not that fake pretend humility where you just act like you're not any good at something. You're like, oh, well, I know it's not any good. But you really deep down, you're like, no, this is amazing. But you're just saying that so you don't put off this vibe that other people won't like. In the words of C.S. Lewis, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. In other words, thinking more about other people, thinking more about what's going on in their lives, and not just being so confident that you have all the answers or that you've got things figured out or that you're the best and brightest, but to think, okay, how are other people involved here? How can we all work together on this? How can I be a ladder builder, not just a ladder climber? But like I said, the Dunning-Kruger effect is not something that you ever really overcome. It's something that we all will have to deal with as long as we're here. It's just the way our brains work. But there are some ways that you can manage it, that you can kind of figure some things out. So at least you're not the guy walking in to rob a bank with lemon juice on his face. But anyway, I would love to hear about some of the funny things that you've noticed as far as the Dunning-Kruger effect in your own life down in the comments. Really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Newton, up the middle. No, I'm sorry, goes right. Still loose.
Oh, did he accelerate?
How about
Oh, my
that?
goodness.
Touchdown, Auburn.
He was so freaking good.